Today on the show, we're chatting all about how the Disney parks around the globe decorate for and celebrate Halloween. We talk about not only what's going on these days, but also discuss a lot of retired Halloween celebrations of yesteryear. And I bet a lot of it you'd never heard of. Do you know which Disney theme park actually used monsters with chainsaws to scare their guests? Or have you heard about the Mr. Toad Halloween event? Maybe you'd like to know more about the Disney Halloween parade featuring a rapping Captain Hook and real dalmatians locked in a cage. Joining me to discuss all of this and so much more is Charlie Price, one of the authors of Holiday Magic at the Disney Parks. The spooky fun begins right now.
It's time to dive into today's Disney dialogue.
Hello, Charlie, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Glad to be here, Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Halloween in the Disney parks because we're both so passionate about it. Of course, you wrote all about it in Holiday Magic at the Disney parks, an encyclopedic book about, the holiday magic in the Disney parks. And you very much were in charge of the Halloween stuff, right?
Primarily, yes. For the archival section, that was all Becky Klein.
We're going to go a little archives at the beginning here because the reality is that Halloween in the Disney parks kind of started before the Disney parks even started. And that's with the Anaheim Halloween Parade, right?
Yes. The Anaheim Halloween Parade, which is celebrating its 99th birthday this year. So it's almost 100 years old. And the first floats were actually for Disney parks. That was something that was very big back in Anaheim's day, where they would actually have people use, because it was more a farming community, they would have people use their tractors to pull things along, and they would actually get celebrities of the time. Very big names would actually come to this small, sleepy town. But at the time, Anaheim was courting Walt, and Walt was courting Anaheim, and this was their meeting point. And they did that in 1953.
Yeah, and I think the Halloween parade people didn't, Disneyland hadn't even been announced yet, right?
No.
It just happened to be this crazy happenstance that they were kind of looking for each other, and then this Halloween parade in Anaheim came along.
Yeah, and the first floats for any Disney park were these Halloween floats. They had 6 floats that first year, and then 6 additional floats. And those the second year, they were done by Yale Gracie of Haunted Mansion fame.
Very cool. And then you fast forward a little bit in 1959, of course, Disneyland's open at this point. Walt decides to have his own little parade in the park. It's called the Parade of the Pumpkins in Holidayland. And this was very much kind of a guest experience, more than a Walt Disney produced experience.
Very much so. Of the time, because there was local events, they didn't always have celebrations for Halloween because guests did associate the park with Halloween, and they were, looking to attract people. So they had 1,000 pumpkins that they offered in Holidayland. And then you would come back next week with your carved pumpkins in one of 3 age ranges and then compete in this festival, the Parade of Pumpkins.
Very cool. And they had the kids marching down Main Street. And, if you were a kid taking part in this and, the now defunct Holidayland, that must have been just such a thrill being a part of a parade at Disneyland.
It had to have been. And then to be able to be judged by celebrity judges of the time. I mean, you had Henry Calvin of Zorro fame was there, which I would have thought would have been the biggest draw, at least for me personally, because I'm a big Zorro fan. But they had 3 different judges. And then, they got to go to the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse Theater and watched holiday specials of the time, and also got a free ticket to the park that day.
Now that's the win right there, the free ticket to the park. Speaking of free ticket to the park, so there was kind of a large gap between the Halloween celebration because, as you said, the city of Anaheim was kind of already doing a great job celebrating the holiday. And listen, back in 1968, Halloween was one day, maybe a weekend. It wasn't 2+ months of entertainment. No. So they felt like Anaheim was doing a good enough job, so the park didn't do too much up until 1994. And then on October 31st, 1994, that seems to be the day that the Disney parks realized, this could be big business, because they offered free Disneyland admission to anybody who showed up with a costume.
So it was a Monday, and there was so much traffic in the area that it wrecked the freeway for 4 hours, just back-to-back traffic, because you had to get in by 8:30. If you weren't, you couldn't get in. So there was a mad dash to try to get to the park for free from 6 to 8:30 in the morning.
That obviously showed them. Halloween's popular. It showed really that people wanted a non-scary option for Halloween because, down the street, starting in the 70s was Knott's Scary Farm, which was a big event for them. Of course, that's grown way bigger over the years, celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. But people wanted scary for Halloween, but there were also people who wanted the not scary options, and Disneyland kind of figured that out in 1994. And since then, it's been, continuous. Of course, it's grown as well. Started as a one-day thing and keeps going and going and going. And now we've got what, a Halloween party starting in August at Magic Kingdom?
Mid-August, not even late August.
Yeah, that's too early for me, but hey. But for the people paying the dollars, it seems to be a lot of people willing to do it. So what the heck?
I guess so, yeah.
But let's talk about some Disneyland stuff that we get these days. I want to talk about Floral Mickey right at the entrance to Disneyland because, throughout the year they change that look, and it's kind of unbelievable how often it changes, really, because, flowers aren't cheap, and they change them with real live flowers consistently. But talk about some of the different Halloween options we've gotten through the years.
So the way that it typically happens is the resort enhancement team, the horticulture side of it, usually plans this a year in advance. So they've had multiple colors, like dark purples and greens, floral Mickey mask. They even had one year with real pumpkins, but then they realized that live pumpkins don't really bode well in the sun, and they quickly had to replace those because it was not a good situation.
But it was my favorite. Oh my God.
Awesome.
I loved it so much. I remember seeing that, and I remember being bummed the following year when they weren't there. And I'm a little surprised, honestly, that the sun did such a job on them because, pumpkins lay out in pumpkin fields or in farmers markets, I feel like, year round. But yeah, it's so interesting that sun at Disneyland kind of messed them up.
That's really what happens to a lot of the decor in that area is they just get so sun-worn. So even Floral Mickey sometimes parts of it has to be replaced multiple times throughout the season, usually sometimes 2 or 3 times, depending on the different floral arrangements that they have. But they put so much thought and care into it. And even when they plant it, it's an event to watch. Usually they always do it overnight, but usually they can get it done in one sitting at night. So you got to figure they can't just go, oh, let's just do part of Floral Mickey and we'll come back tomorrow. It's either one or done. So that's such teamwork. They usually use the previous version for mulch, or sometimes what they've been doing lately is they give those flowers to the cast members. So they have a nice little keepsake as well.
All right, then we head into the park onto Main Street, USA, and this is very much like a pumpkin festival that's going on there. Do you have any favorite elements of this area?
Well, yeah, I definitely do. First, when you go in, you get to see those giant Mickey, Minnie, Goofy pumpkins. They're amazing, and that really sets the tone.
Oh, you're talking about over the entrance.
Over the entrance. So when you first go in, that gives you that really nice sense of arrival when you first go in. But yes, there's definitely some favorites. The Elvis pumpkin that's above the 20th Century Music Shop. There's also inside that shop, inside the case, there is a tribute to Louis Armstrong. So he's blowing on a trumpet. So that's a really, really fun one. They used to have an Abraham Lincoln one. That since has disappeared. They tend to change things out over the years for a variety of reasons, just because they want to keep things fresh. So typically, even though you see hundreds and hundreds of pumpkins, it's never exactly the same year by year. But I think the Elvis one for me is the one that I always look for and really reminds me of the Halloween season there.
One of the interesting things I read in your book was that it was a little difficult to get these decorations to fit that turn of the century feel of Main Street USA because turn of the century sort of decorations were kind of, for one day use. Halloween is one day. And then it's like, okay, now you got to translate that into 2 months of use. And it becomes, making these vintage looking decorations, but with materials that can withstand. And as we discussed with the pumpkins, that Southern California sun can do a number.
Yeah, very much so. I think that was one of the biggest challenges that they have, especially with the bunting, which is traditionally used for Fourth of July. Changing the color scheme is what really helped cement that, so they could still they kind of were two holidays collide, so to speak. They blend the elements together of that era. So that was always been the biggest challenge. Knowing if something is in a guest reach, it has to go by a certain quality test versus if it's behind glass, they can change it a certain way. But that was especially of the era where it's supposed to be, like the 1920s, 1930s. Those were all supposed to be, one day, one event items. So they really had to try to find something that really went for the spirit of what it was about rather than the actual material, because there's no way those things would get destroyed in one day.
Yeah, and have you visited by any chance? This is new since your book came out, but the Plaza Point Holiday Shop that's on Main Street, USA now?
Yes, I have, and I love that shop. That shop is very much the baby of Kim Irvine, Dawn Keene, and her team in resort enhancement. And they just put so much love and care. Actually, the proprietor of the shop is based off of Dawn Keene's mother, who Dawn Keene works in resort enhancement. So there's a lot of personal touches in that shop.
Very nice. And most of the year it's about the Christmas holiday, but I think there's always a little bit of Halloween, and then of course around Halloween it becomes all Halloween, or a lot of Halloween anyway. And it's such a cool shop. And I want to talk about some stuff that, no longer exists. It's part of the past. Maybe some of it'll come back, but Space Mountain Ghost Galaxy. I always loved this over in Tomorrowland. This was such a cool update to the attraction. I don't know exactly how many years it ran, but I do feel like it's kind of off and on inconsistent, and it's been a little while since we've gotten it at this point. But do you have any memories of that or thoughts on that one?
So there's actually a predecessor to that, which is Nightmare Nebula. So what they did is they had a cast member event. They basically made Space Mountain pitch black, which, I mean, it's already dark enough to begin with. And then it was a lot of the villains just cackling throughout the ride. It was a one-night event just to kind of test out the feel. And then the version that we're talking about emulated from Hong Kong. So they took their own, and it was so much fun because you would go there and you'd really get to hear all the noises when you would be in line, and you would see the Nightmare Nebula ghost just slowly crawling on the walls. And then when you would go in, see that thing chasing you, really added a really fun and spooky element. And the guests loved it. The lines were very long for a very long time. Throughout the whole season, you'd find like 1.5, 2 hour waits easily because it was so popular. And then it lasted for, I think over almost a good 10 plus years. And then eventually they just decided to go in another direction with everything that they were doing. And unfortunately, it's no longer there. But I hope at some point, especially with technology advancing, that it eventually comes back, because then you could really add more elements to that projection that, seem very dated by the time because of how fast our technology goes by.
Yeah, I really, really, really loved Ghost Galaxy. I think it's fantastic.
The music was amazing.
The thing I loved about it was, I don't know about you, but I've ridden Space Mountain at Disneyland so many times that I know the soundtrack score, and I know which way my body's going to move based on the music.
Yeah.
And with Ghost Galaxy, you don't get to ride it as often because it's only during the holiday season. It made the track surprise me, the roller coaster track. And that there was this element of, it really felt like a new attraction. I just love it.
Especially at the end where you would see that eyeball come out at you, and that was so unexpected to give you a little jump. That was a really fun element rather than feel like you're blasting back into the area.
Absolutely. Talk to me about 1996, where we had some pirates on the sailing ship Columbia.
So that's time when they were looking to do. So with a lot of that era, it was very homegrown. They were trying to really get a feel of what they wanted to do at the park. So they would have, ghostly type pirates to be around you to tell you stories and scare you. And then if you went around the rivers of America, they also put ghosts, quote unquote, on the island with sheets over their heads over some of the animatronics. And it was meant to have some of that was meant to have kind of a campy, fun feel, but it was always very homegrown, which is so fascinating about the holidays at all the parks, is they all started that way. Each one had to figure out what their guests were interested in, and then they would just lean into that more and more.
Yeah, and they would literally take like the animal animatronics and just like throw a sheet over it. So it was
Yep.
very, like you said, campy and silly, and it was all kind of tongue in cheek sort of stuff. So it's fun. Now, something I still miss. Listen, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is epic, but I will never get over losing Big Thunder Ranch and the Big Thunder Ranch Halloween Carnival Roundup, which ran from 2010 to 2015. I'm so grateful I got to witness this in person. Actually, had a shorter run than I realized. I didn't realize it was, 6 years there. So, yeah, any memories of this?
That was actually my favorite place I would go to with my family. We always gravitated towards there. And there was a reason for that too, is the park wanted to get people to that area. So that's why they gave that area so much love. And the fun thing is you would go inside the Scaredy Shack and you would see these great pumpkins. And those pumpkins were actually based off of Jack Pumpkinhead. So they had a Disney element to it. And then you would go through the area. And the fun part is a number of the elements that you would see were based from previous Disney movies. So they had a fun familiarity to them, but they were used in a very different way than they'd previously been used. So the idea of conjuring a villain was so much fun because you never knew which one you were going to get. So that was part of the excitement. And then you had this interesting meet and greet because you were in a tent with them and they would just mingle with you in a way that you normally didn't get it. They also had pumpkin carvers, and these were highly skilled people. So you got to see them in action, and they would do such an array of pumpkins that it was so great just to experience. And then there were shows that they had as well. So it was really just, you had everything there. You really didn't need to go anywhere else. I agree with you. That was my favorite part. It was such an amazing event. And not even to mention with the animals, they would put little hats or handkerchiefs on the animals. So they also were in the Halloween season. So you really felt like you were in this fun autumn area, but also had this Halloween spooky villainous element to it. And they would even have a little like mini parade where you would go around outside the tent with the kids. So you had everything there. It was great.
Yeah, it was very autumnal, and it was a very small town kind of homegrown feel. Like it was the least corporate area of the park is kind of how I would describe it. Like you went there and it felt like your local amusement park as opposed to like Disneyland, which, listen, we all love Disneyland, but like there was something really quaint and precious about Big Thunder Ranch, and it's something I still have a hard time letting go of. It was some really great memories, and not only for Halloween, but like Christmas was unbelievable. 4th of July was unbelievable. Like they did a lot of fun stuff throughout the year there, and there was some really good food. So
yes, the barbecue.
Let's talk about the Halloween tree, which is seen in Frontierland. And this is the tree that, as you're walking through, you'll see one particular tree lit up with a bunch of orange lights and some pumpkins hanging in there. And it's based off of a very famous book by Ray Bradbury, who has a connection to Disney. And this was a surprise for him, right?
Of the time when this was happening, Ray was driving around LA and he started to notice there was a lot of Halloween trees in the area. And he was also, in his late 80s and kind of ill health at the time. So he's like, I really want to have something in Disneyland that represents me. And he wanted the Halloween tree to be it. So he had a few meetings originally. There was talks of putting it on Main Street where it would be a giant tree similar to the Christmas tree. And then you would have it lit up with hundreds of pumpkins. That was at the same time they're doing the giant Mickey pumpkin. So the timing of it just didn't work out. So he didn't think anything of it. But he had called a couple of friends at Imagineering, Tim Delaney, and then also chatted with Tony Baxter, Disney legend Tony Baxter. And he's like, well, if we ever did anything, it would be great to do something at the club, Club 33. So like, how are we going to do anything at the club? That place is always packed. So happened circumstance, right after that call, they called the club and said, do you have any days we might be able to have something there, just an event to celebrate Ray? They only had one day open, and it was on Halloween Day. And so it was very serendipitous. And then they had to fill it up themselves. And within 30 minutes of putting out the word, that was sold out. So it was very much, there was a love affair with wanting to celebrate Ray. So when he went there, he talked about experiences with Walt, how they met at a store off of Wilshire Boulevard. And he asked Walt to lunch. And the next day he was at Walt's office because Walt said yes. And they just became friends over time. And so he always had this great affinity for the parks, always spoke very highly of them. So when they eventually took him over after having a talk about his book and also doing a signing, he was very moved. They had him light it up for the first time, and there was 3 different Imagineers that went overnight and basically used Sharpies to make these handmade versions of them. So there's a lot of just like love and care because they wanted to do it very specific to what it represented for his book. And when they turned it on, what I was told by Tony Baxter is there was a tear that fell down his right cheek because he always felt he belonged in Disneyland, and now he had a permanent home. And he even said hello to Walt Disney's ghost shining down on him from somewhere above. It was a very sweet moment for everybody that was there.
And there's even a plaque that, notices Ray Bradbury there every Halloween season. So definitely check that out if you're at Disneyland that time of year. Very, very cool. Now, some stuff I've never even heard of. 1999, Mr. Toad's Enchanted Evening.
Yes.
What is this?
This is a very interesting event. So Enchanted Evening was actually based off of the character of Mr. Toad from Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And they had characters. It was primarily an event for merchandise, but they had it all in Fantasyland. It started in right near off of Main Street, where they would showcase different items that they were selling, and then they would go into Fantasyland. So this was a Halloween-based event in Fantasyland, which really does not happen, especially at Disneyland. So one of the fun things that they would do is Cruella interrupted at one point, and then Brom Bones was really kind of the MC of the event in terms of characters, and they used the carousel to really tell the story of the different attractions. So they first had one where they talked about Peter Pan, and then Peter Pan appeared and everybody went on Peter Pan. Then they had one where they talked about Snow White and everybody went to Snow White. And then they had one for Pinocchio. And then the last one was Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. And in it, they actually had cast members dressed up as various characters like policemen in that one scene to tell you to slow down. They had all the working lights on. So it was a little bit different than people were used to, but that was for safety reasons. So it was a very fun event. They even had a chase sequence with Ichabod and the Headless Horseman, but Ichabod was on the carousel going around, but the Headless Horseman actually showed up in Fantasyland. It was such an amazing event in terms of being very quaint and charming and very unique.
I had never heard of this, and this sounds wild, just like his ride. So there we go. A cast member exclusive that I'm unfamiliar with is the Little Monsters on Main Street.
Yes. We actually, Graham Allen and I had a chance to go to this event. My co-author, Graham Allen, the amazing world traveler. So that event started in 1990. So it was an event for cast members to bring their kids to do trick-or-treating in the parks. So it kind of went back and forth between Disneyland. That's why it's, Little Monsters on Main Street, and also California Adventure, where they would close the park in particular areas for that night. Cast members would bring their kids. They'd have other cast members volunteer, and they would do trick-or-treating. They would even have a little mini parade. And the one that we attended at California Adventure had Mickey and Minnie. And so it was very fun for the kids to all be able to go around and just enjoy the park in a very homegrown version of, I guess you would say, any of the major holiday events that they have there, the Halloween events. So it was very quaint, very charming experience for all the cast members. And they loved just having a chance to be at the park with their kid trick-or-treating. Like, what a unique experience that most people never get.
Yeah, I love that. And another event I never heard of, Mahalloween Luau at the Disneyland Hotel. Some of these are off the wall. And listen, some of these last only 1 year, but man, they make a little note in history, that's for sure. And I love, just to go back to your book, I love how your book points out all these things. And it's just like, wow, I'd never heard of that before. So Mahalloween Luau at the Disneyland Hotel.
So that was the very interesting part of working on the book too, is we would find these things, or we would talk to these people, because there's so many cast members that worked there during those times that they're like, do you know about this event? Or they would have prototypes or samples. So Halloween was one of those unique events. It was their first time actually doing a Halloween Trader Sam's tiki mug that was inspired by, I guess you would say, Jack Skellington, but not completely that character. So they had a very fun event where you can go and have it on the lawn right outside the Disneyland Hotel. There was music that was played. And then you would have a chance to get those very rare tiki mugs that are very sought after these days. And that kind of started the trend of the various Halloween tiki mugs that are released at Trader Sam's, typically around the October season.
Very nice. Now let's hop over to Disney California Adventure, where, of course, Buena Vista Street is decked out for the holidays with Oogie Boogie in mind, of course. And, there's the great windows on Buena Vista Street. There's some of my favorite elements would be the bats flying out of the top of the Carthay Circle restaurant. I love them flying out of the tower there. And the Headless Horseman is a really, really cool addition. And, Buena Vista Street is very like purple and green, whereas Disneyland's very black and orange. But yeah, anything to add about the Headless Horseman or any of your favorite elements on Buena Vista Street?
I think what's fascinating is the evolution that got us there, where they had Candy Corn Acres before. So it was very much in the orange and green. Sunshine in every bite, where you would have Heimlich coming out of a giant candy corn, to then trying to figure out what would be the next era. And Resort Enhancement loves this section of the park. It's their favorite one because they really get to have a lot of extra fun, especially because, it's still fairly new. It debuted in 2012 is when they went over to Buena Vista Street. So just being able to really kind of, a lot of that area is based off of, local Glendale, Los Feliz, Los Angeles, and California. So it's down the street from Anaheim. So they really had fun just going after and figuring out what this event would be. And the Headless Horseman, that's such a unique part of Disney's history. And to be able to have its own statue really kind of gives a different spirit to California Adventure during the holiday season. And they also pay a lot of tribute to the animated cartoons of the time. So you would see things with, Mickey and a ghost in a window. I think that's one of the amazing things about all those windows displays. Even if you go with Rock Candy Mountain, they do a haunted house just right there. It's very subtle, very simple, but the fact that they add all these different elements to it, or right around the corner, they have a candy graveyard that most people just don't always see because, if you look to the left, you have the Headless Horseman, which obviously takes the attention. And the fun part about him too is he has a whole different experience if you see him at nighttime, because you hear the music, but when you get to hear him like cackling at night and you get to see like the fiery nostrils and the glowing eyes, it just really comes to life.
And it's probably one of the more like scary permanent elements like out in the open in the park. It's like in realistic interpretation of the Headless Horseman. There's nothing cartoony about it or anything, and I love that. I think it's great. It's just such a cool element. But you touched on something that my gosh, Candy Corn Acres.
Oh yes,
DCA 1.0. Listen, it wasn't all great, but there were moments that were very memorable. And Candy Corn Acres. Candy corn to me is just. I love candy corn, and it's just so symbolic of the greatest day of the year. So I don't know, having these giant candy corn around, I loved it. I wonder where they are. I wonder if Archives has any giant candy corn left, because I would love to see them come back.
That would be fascinating to know. I know for a lot of things, sometimes they find homes in other places. Like sometimes they end up in a warehouse. Sometimes they sell things off to cast members. So there's probably some cast members that have a giant candy corn. I know Graham Allen has a fruitcake from the Jingle Cruise. So sometimes those find their way home to people. But I can imagine, hopefully she has some somewhere in a warehouse, somewhere in Southern California. You have to wonder if they delivered that. She's like, what am I doing with a giant candy corn and where am I going to put it? But just to have even the pop-up Heimlich that they had, where he would just kind of come out and bite on a candy corn and then disappear. Like, what a fun element to have.
Yeah, it was a cool little look. And don't get me wrong, Buena Vista Street is spectacular, but Candy Corn Acres was very, very sweet. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Let's hop over to Halloween in Cars Land, because, oh my gosh, what an overlay that is. In particular, I love the parody movie posters. Those are fun to look at. And just like with the Christmas time, there's using the different car parts to decorate, and they just do such a great job. I love the way they use the orange cones and just all the different elements. So cool and spectacular.
Yeah, the way that actually started, the Imagineer, Kevin Rafferty, who was working on that, he was gardening one Saturday morning and got a call and said, hey, we should do Halloween in Cars Land. And this is why they were obviously making it. So they incorporated it into the land at the start, which is very rare. Usually everything comes afterwards. So they already had this prepared. And then obviously that brought on a winter Christmas version. So just the details I mean, and as you go around, just seeing like the mummy tractor that they have, or just how they use making the spider webs or the spiders with car parts, or even really sweet elements like adding the ofrenda to Doc inside one of the shops. So they just really went with a very unique theme with the cars. And even I think now they have in front of Luigi's, one of the characters is dressed up as kind of a Jedi character. So it's very fun, all the elements together that they put in. They really leaned into the theming, and it's spectacular.
Yeah, another piece of DCA Halloween is part of an old attraction. I'm not familiar. I know of Golden Dreams, but I don't ever remember Golden Screams. What was this?
So Golden Screams, you would get a chance to do your best villain impersonation, and then the winner would get a Golden Screams trophy at the end. And they would typically bring out a villain for you to interact with or model. So it was and it was hosted by an MC who does a lot of improv, who works for Imagineering. So it was very fun and interactive experience compared to what they would normally have, which would be Golden Dreams, which was a show that people just sit there and watch, a movie. So it didn't last too long. That was one that really surprised me during my times at the parks. I had never seen it. But it had been there. So, and there's video proof.
Interesting. And of course, Plaza de la Familia is really beautiful in Disney California Adventure, and I think a unique offering in that park as well.
Oh, very much so. I think, having that there really also gives its unique experience for California Adventure compared to the one that they have in Frontierland for Dia de los Muertos. So they each have their own elements, and the fact that they have some amazing things that they can put in there that celebrate different parts of the autumn season. And that was the fun part about our book and why we named it the autumn and the winter holidays, because, people primarily think of just Halloween, but there's so many more things. Like Dia de los Muertos is very big holiday for a lot of different cultures around the world. So there was so many unique things that you're able to put in there. And even having, the wall where you're able to put a message to your loved one that has passed away, that's very memorable for so many people, especially was for me.
Now, that was a lot of talk about the Disneyland Resort. Let's hop over to the other coast, to Walt Disney World, where primarily Halloween is celebrated in Magic Kingdom. So unlike Disneyland Resort, where it's both at Disneyland and Buena Vista Street, or rather Disney California Adventure, Magic Kingdom's kind of the hub for Halloween at Walt Disney World. And yeah, we have that pumpkin festival on Main Street, and they have a lot of pumpkins as well, but scarecrows kind of take the lead over there, right?
Yeah, very much so. The unique thing about that area is that's all very themed to the time, but there's a lot of personal touches to the scarecrows. So the designer who designed the scarecrows based those off of family members. So they all have the different personalities, but they're dressed as proprietors of the different shops on Main Street, or the band is the Philharmonic Band of Main Street. So they have a lot of unique elements that are personal, but also of the park. And with some of the pumpkins, if you look and where they're from, that's actually the hometown of the designer of that area, plus the last name of the designer and their partner combined together, and the year that they met minus 100 years. So they added a lot of fun, unique elements to it. But yeah, that's very much all about the town scarecrows to add a very unique personal touch for the Magic Kingdom.
Very cool. Any other touches? I mean, obviously they have their own huge Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party, but for normal daytime guests, any other favorite elements of yours at Magic Kingdom?
I like how a lot of the pumpkins match the proprietors of the shop. So you really have an idea of what's there as you walk by. Some other fun elements, personal touches. There's a house, and that house is the house that the art director grew up in and trick-or-treated around. There's one of 4 friends, and those are based off of the art director's 4 friends. So there's a lot of interesting personal touches. I like there's one that it's a skeleton with a key in his mouth. Just very fun and just got a very unique atmosphere to it as you walk down.
One thing that surprises me a little, and I know that they're certainly not copycat versions of each other at all, like they're their own unique things, but one thing I'm surprised hasn't been copied from Disneyland simply due to its popularity is the giant Mickey pumpkin in Town Square looking down Main Street, USA. And honestly, I feel like it would be more fitting at Magic Kingdom because here it kind of blocks Sleeping Beauty Castle, whereas at Magic Kingdom, you could have it in Town Square and still have a great view of Cinderella Castle. Do you know if there was ever any talk of bringing the giant Mickey, or if there's a reason why it's not there?
That's a good question. You would think that that would actually fit there. I know for the parks, they do talk to each other, but they're pretty much independent in terms of how they design things. So I'm not sure exactly why that element didn't make it into the parks. Maybe they wanted to do their own thing at the time. They started also decorating and keeping permanent decorations a little bit earlier in terms of before that pumpkin was even out. So I'm not sure why that didn't translate. I know for a lot of the parks, typically they like to have their own elements to it to make them unique, especially with Walt Disney World versus Disneyland, because for a lot of people in America, that's, a 5-hour plane ride away. So you can actually go to both, where if you go internationally, some of the other parks have similar elements that you would find here, like Disneyland and Hong Kong have a lot of similar visual elements. So there's a little bit of, we want to do our own thing, I'm guessing.
Also at Walt Disney World, over at Fort Wilderness, there's this really unique thing called the Halloween Golf Cart Parade.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this.
So that was one part we really wish we could have put into the book. Unfortunately, because these are all guest designed golf carts and also campgrounds, we couldn't put any in. It's amazing.
It's written about a little bit. You just don't have photos.
We don't have photos in it. But it's amazing because people, this is part of their vacation. They come down with all of this decor and everything to build and put onto their carts. Some people have full-size displays on their carts as they go by, or giant displays as you go by their campsites. It is absolutely amazing, the creativity and the ingenuity that they put in to that area. And it really adds such a unique element that you don't find at any of the other hotels, because it's all personally decorated by guests. And I can't imagine how many bins and bins and bins people put in. I mean, I've seen everything from, full-size castles to Millennium Falcons. They really find a way to just use cardboard to the best possible advantage.
Also at Fort Wilderness, something that I don't believe is mentioned in the book, I'm curious if you've heard of. Do you know about the Return to Sleepy Hollow event?
Yes. They used to have an event where you would be on a little hayride, and then the Headless Horseman would come after you. And I had a friend who actually went on this and said it was terrifying because he would be galloping towards you and swinging a sword in your general facility. And they were wondering, is he actually going to hit us? It was a lot more optical illusion based in terms of distance, but the fact that you see a Headless Horseman with a sword coming at you can be very terrifying.
So that was at Fort Wilderness. I actually got to experience a later generation of that, but it was a very, very cool. I think it might have been the last year they did it, because it was soon before pandemic. And then I know there was a lot of construction happening at Fort Wilderness. I don't think it's returned, but it was honestly one of the coolest, most unique Walt Disney World events I've ever done, but it was pretty small. It was like $25, so it was super, super affordable. And it was just, you hung out in the one of the farmhouses there, with the horses that lived at Fort Wilderness. And they set up chairs to watch a screening of the short film. And then at the end, the screen would rise, all of this fog would billow out, and there would be the Headless Horseman to do photo ops. And with this, you got unlimited popcorn and a unique pin collectible as well. And I'm telling you, it was $25, I believe. And I was like, this is honestly the best kept secret at Walt Disney World for Halloween. It was awesome.
So you got to think, with also the Headless Horseman and the horse that portrays his horse, there's a lot of training involved, because the Headless Horseman is using one hand, has limited visibility, and holding up a pumpkin in the other hand. And the horse has to be used to certain elements like fog. They're not used to seeing fog all the time, or coming out of a dark place and having, people just staring at them. So they usually do a lot of practicing weeks before any event with the Headless Horseman, just so the horse can get familiar, because things that are bigger than them, massively bigger than them, or very small, can sometimes cause a lot of fear for the horses. So there's so much training and practicing involved just for an event like that.
Let's hop overseas. We'll go to Hong Kong Disneyland, which kind of celebrates Halloween in a very different way. In fact, at one point, they even had haunted houses inside of Hong Kong Disneyland.
All right, yeah. So the first one that they had was in 2007, and that was the Main Street Haunted House, and that was Haunted Hotel, and that was based off of drawings that they found for the Haunted Mansion. So they really had a fun time just building this out. This was something that was very unique to this park. They were used to it in areas like Ocean Park, which is a park that's close down the street. So they felt that the guests had an appetite for that. And the fun part was it changed in different areas. They had one in Adventureland, which was Demon Jungle. And that one was very much using the Jungle Cruise in a very unique way. One in Tomorrowland, Alien Invasion. And some of these commercials, like I was saying, are very terrifying. The one that I had a lot of visuals of is The Revenge of the Headless Horseman. And the whole premise of that one is someone from the Society of Adventurers and Explorers had stolen his head. So as you went around, everybody's head was chopped off throughout, including birds. So you'd see all these headless dancers, headless characters. And at the end, he comes after you and they take you to a backstage area to make you really think like, oh, this guy is going to come get you. And then they usher you out of the ride. It was brilliant how they pulled that one off. And at the same time, in the 2012 range, they also had one called Graves Academy. And it's basically the most nightmarish version you would see of your school. So going to see like your school luncheon and like the creepy foods they would give you, or the disciplinarian librarian. And then they kind of changed a little bit where they did like twisted versions of different Disney and Pixar characters. So the Nightmare Experiment and the Maze of Madness. I mean, they even had Pinocchio in chains, or having the Mad Hatter literally chop off someone's head. And then they went more with a Tim Burton theme and kind of introduced Jack Skellington and friends and had a version of that, where they even had like scare actors actually jump out at you. So it was a very fun, unique experience just based for Hong Kong.
Yeah, I love that they went into the scare factor because I mean, I'm a huge horror fan, and I wish we would get a version of that. Listen, we don't need it here. There's enough competition, that's for sure. And Disney does what it does very, very well here. But there's always a part of me. I remember specifically seeing like a Mad Hatter maze. And I think like in a psycho ward or, an asylum of sorts. And I was just like, oh my God, like this looks incredible and something we would never see at a Disney park in the States.
Never. The sensibilities of what the guests are expecting are very, very different. And plus, too, the appetite for it to be here would be so large. The lines would be, hours long, and they would have to build one that's 2 or 3 times the size that they would have in Hong Kong.
You mentioned something with the Jungle Cruise. Was that Horrors of the Amazon?
Yeah, they had Demon Jungle and Horrors of the Amazon. So basically this plant was coming after you, and they would have these projection screens showing the different adventurers getting taken down and essentially eaten by this demon plant in a jungle.
And then Mystic Manor, did they have some sort of Halloween thing as well? Cycle of Spirits?
Yes. And that one was really interesting because all the characters were very in ghostly white, and they had this very creepy music, but they would just come up to people and just stare at you. And then they just walk around very nonchalantly, but very creepily. And it was a half-hour show. They would never say one word. It was just always about being ghosts in the environment.
But that was like in the attraction?
Oh, no, that was outside. That was right outside the attraction.
Gotcha. Kind of like the ghosts that are hanging out by the Haunted Mansion in Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. Over at Tokyo Disneyland, let's fly over there now. We've got Mickey's Toontown, very much that scarecrow theme of Main Street at Magic Kingdom, but very, very, very silly.
Yes, so much fun. They really went all out with their version over there. They have pumpkin versions of all the Fab Five characters and a lot of fun, interesting ghosts, very leaning into the Toon feel of it. And all their houses are decorated. They got like a fun, spooky kitsch feeling to it, really kind of leading into like the greens and the blacks and the oranges. And they even have a pumpkin car that Goofy has. And even the trash cans are Halloween themed. So they're black and orange with typically little bats. So everything in that land, they really went all out for.
I love that. Anything else in Tokyo that stands out to you?
So they have these really interesting vignette dioramas. So when you go into the plaza area, you will see fun, interesting scenes, usually with ghosts or the characters are dressed up. In fact, if you've been to Disneyland in the past on the tram route, you would actually see some of those characters from 2005 when they were in Tokyo. They brought those over here. So you saw Mickey and Minnie as King and Queen, or you would see Pluto and Goofy. So they had that over in Tokyo, but they changed theirs out every single year. That's when I also wish I'd find out where those go, because they just put so much interesting detail, and it's usually 2 or 3, and they're so much fun to look at. Sometimes they're silly, like Goofy having a pie eating contest with a ghost. Sometimes it's really depending on the themes. If it's music based, they'll be singing in Halloween costumes. So they really go all out for those.
I remember those little statues you're talking about on the tram at Disneyland. I didn't realize that those came from Tokyo.
Yep.
That's so funny, because they used them for a lot of years here. I'm not sure if they still do, but yeah, I remember those. That's very cool. Now let's fly over to Disneyland Paris. I love this bramble patch in Maleficent's court that they do. This is such a cool, unique element near the Sleeping Beauty castle.
Yeah, the thing that's so unique about it is it has 2 different elements. Like, obviously it's bramble, but it looks like a dragon, and the way that they light it at night. And that's also a fun way to introduce Maleficent and other Disney villains into that area. So they'll come and greet you. But Maleficent has a whole introduction when she's coming into the area, which is very fitting considering she's trying to take over Fantasyland, because obviously that would be her jam.
Yeah, it's a creepy little looking. I mean, honestly, it could stay there year round. It would kind of be fitting, but given the story of Sleeping Beauty, but it's a nice little additional element for Halloween. There's also something about a Phantom Manor wedding. I love Phantom Manor. It's a really fantastic version of Haunted Mansion, but there's a wedding there, or what was this?
So they had a projection on the Phantom Manor showing the whole story and the creepy wedding that they had. And they used the music. They really told that story. So they had a visual that everybody could watch outside.
It is wild how much of this stuff, I mean, there are some elements that stay for decades, and then other elements that pop up for 1 year and you kind of forget. And honestly, there are sometimes elements that I'm like, did I make this up in my mind? Because it's I'm thinking specifically of Christmas time on Main Street with the giant the giant tree at Disneyland. And I don't know if you remember this, but whenever they would do the snowfall, they would light that tree with really, really bright white LEDs in addition to their red and green and like the traditional look. And it would signify the snow had fallen on the tree. And like, I remember this. And then all of a sudden 1 year it was gone. And I was like, did I make this up in my mind? I feel like that's something that wouldn't just go away. It has been confirmed. It did exist at one point. I didn't make it up. So I'm happy to know I'm not going crazy, but I still miss it every year. I'm like, it was such a cool element. But, these things can't last forever, and they go away for many, many different reasons.
Yeah.
But it is wild how much effort is put into some of these things. Especially what were you saying in Tokyo? A lot of this stuff is just like one time and then it's gone the next year.
Yeah, and they really go out. And Paris has a very unique history with that too. They had this one where it would take the Molly Brown, which is Disney's version of the Mark Twain, around the river. And they had this apparition, this floating apparition that's looking down, and it's chained, and it looks like it's in some sort of agony. And it was there for 1 year, and it just dragged the Molly Brown around. Or even the elements of like the Pumpkin Men versus the Pink Witches, which to me are so fascinating. These Pumpkin Men are also kind of based off of Jack Pumpkinhead. So they were trying to figure out, the Imagineers were trying to figure out, how do we introduce a holiday to a culture and to a theme park? So they went with pumpkins, they did like pumpkin piñatas, and then they eventually settled on these Pumpkin Men. And these Pumpkin Men are from Halloween Land, and they live in the Pumpkinwood Forest. And as they grow up, they actually have charts showing how they actually grow up. And at one point they had it where they would go from the forest all the way to try to get to Thunder Mountain to get the orange glow from there. But if they fell in the water, they essentially died in this green goo. But their whole livelihood was they wanted to paint. So they wanted to paint Main Street in their favorite color, which was orange. But after a couple years, they got these rivals, which were the Pink Witches. And the Pink Witches' whole goal was to go on a cruise. But they liked to battle the Pumpkin Men. And whoever won that year got to decorate Main Street in their favorite color, which was orange or pink. Some years when the Pumpkin Men won, but when the Witches won, they would basically freeze the Pumpkin Men in the positions that they defeated them in. So it was a very weird, kind of unique experience. And then after, a number of years, that element went away and then it became Lonesome Ghost themed. So things do change over time, but the pumpkin men are still there in just a very different form. So I can imagine if you're a kid, you're like, I went to Main Street and I saw this weird pink witch that was crashed into a building and all these pumpkin men looked like they had been impaled. And their parents are like, no, you're making that up. But that actually did happen.
I love this idea of like a battle going on where like guests don't know each year which version could it be, who will have won. That's actually a really fascinating concept. I would love to see, taken in some of the domestic parks.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, just with the people, people blog about when a bench moves at a Disney park. Can you imagine if like there was really that anticipation of when, of course it would get leaked. I guess that's the annoying part, but like the anticipation of, hey, you're not going to really know who wins this Halloween battle until we reveal it on the opening date of the Halloween time. But, that's such a fun concept. I love that.
Yeah, people would go crazy.
Yeah, I love it. Talk to me about Terrorific Nights at the Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris. Was this like an add-on ticket, or was this part of like normal?
It was
operation?
an add-on ticket.
Okay.
So this was probably the most unique events in terms of add-on tickets that were around. If you've ever seen any pictures of it, it is unlike anything you've seen in any Disney park. They had the Headless Horseman there with a giant sword. They had devils. They had characters with chainsaws. They really leaned into the dark and spooky, similar to something you would see at a Horror Nights event. This was very much adult-themed Disney night. They were not going for not so scary. They were very much going for scary. And even on the tram route, they would have characters come by and, scream at you or use a chainsaw. It's the sensibilities they were trying to test with the audience in Paris to see what they were interested in, if they were wanting to go more macabre-based. So it was very much an adult-based event. And they had little mazes that you go in as well. They were also very darkly themed too. Not necessarily to any Disney property, just more like goblins and ghoulies and devils and creatures that go bump in the night.
I had no idea they did such an adult horror experience in Paris. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have checked that out. That is very, very cool. Now, Shanghai Disneyland, what goes on over there for the holidays? And of course, the newest of the resorts. And how do they celebrate the holiday there?
So a lot of theirs is they have, the pumpkins, and they have a garden that you would go through that you would see all the different characters, and there's kind of a trick-or-treating element. They do also have some darker elements to it, but they're I feel like they're still kind of finding their way. So typically a more show-based, villainous shows is kind of how they've been celebrating. Usually for all these events, it takes them a couple years to really go, oh, this is what our audience is interested in, and going towards that direction.
I want to talk about, worldwide, each of these resorts tend to have their own Halloween parade of some sort. Now, some of these are done during private ticketed events like a Mickey's Not So Scary or an Oogie Boogie Bash. Others are during regular daytime hours. There's a couple little elements I want to talk about. Let's go to 1999 because there was a rapping Captain Hook in a parade. Was this for Booty You?
Yeah.
Or where was this?
Yes, this was. Yes, there was a Booty You, and it was a rapping Captain Hook. They also had actual live puppies in a cage with Cruella.
Okay.
Thing you'll never ever see today, but yeah. The Captain Hook.
I love that visual. Oh my God, a cage full of Dalmatians.
And you can tell
Cruella.
These Dalmatians were like, what are we doing in this cage? Who are all these people? Why are they staring at us? It was...
Was that Booty You as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
They were both in there, but the rapping Captain Hook, that takes a special place. And if you ever listen to it, you're like, oh, this was very 1990s. And this would have been like early 1990s, but they did it in late 1990s. And it didn't quite fit. They were trying something different. And Poor Captain Hook.
Oh man, I need to find a video of this. I am not familiar with the rapping Captain Hook, but that sounds unique. Another unique element that is such a crowd pleaser with many of the Disney Halloween parades around the world are the grave diggers with these shovels that spark when they scrape across the ground. And there's a fun little story of how this was pretty much accidental.
Yes, I've actually heard multiple people claim responsibility for this accident. So not quite sure who is the originator. It could be it happened around the same time. Similar people had the idea, but basically someone was carrying a shovel and it started scraping the ground. They're like, hey, that's really cool. And then they decided to test it out and try it at the park. The fun thing about the grave diggers too is the entertainment team encourages them to all have their own backstory. So the ways that they walk and they move of like how they came to be a grave digger, if they're alive or, they're kind of in between and, what they do with their day so that it adds to their kind of movement and their walking around. So each of those characters really have a personal touch to them as they go through the parade.
Do you have any other favorite little moments from a Halloween parade at any of the parks?
Yes. So the interesting thing about all these parades are they're all very much homegrown. So for instance, Paris's version, when they first did it, imagine you're sitting there and you're waiting to see Mickey and Minnie and you see a skeleton riding a motorcycle. And behind the skeleton is a giant skull. And inside the sockets of the skull are Mickey and Minnie. That was how they were first introduced in a Halloween parade. And then they would have just different like witches and goblins. It was very macabre. Tokyo Disneyland, their first version in 1997, the parade was a car that was decorated with some pumpkins and had some characters. And then 400 guests followed behind as they played a popular Halloween song. It's changed so much over time. You have Tokyo has Spooky Boo. And Spooky Boo is this amazing 15-minute show that musically has elements from different Disney parks and takes homage to like a couple of horror films too in a very subtle way. And the whole thing is Mickey and the gang are all dressed up and then they fall asleep and they basically have nightmares where they become zombies. So it's a very fun element. Or Mickey's Illusion Manor, which is now in Paris, where it's based off of Mystic Manor. But as each time Mickey goes in, he comes out seconds later in a different costume. So it's a very fun element. They've really grown over time. And, as we talked about having character-based performers as they go around, the same thing with the Gravediggers applies to all of the ballroom dancers. Their whole thing is, how did they kill each other? Or did one kill another? They didn't. So that's how they were really infused. So they really they write down, usually in like a page or two of like, this is how I died or who killed me. And then that's infuses their relationship as they go and dance down. But in the parades, by far, the hardest character to get a really good picture of is the Headless Horseman because they are on a horse and it's dark and they go by somewhat very fast. Now they trot, but they used to run all the way down throughout the entire parade.
What's so interesting is, we've been talking about the Disney decorations and celebrations throughout the entire world. The amount of times we've brought up the Headless Horseman is kind of remarkable.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I've always loved this element, but I've never thought too much about how seen he is or how prevalent he is in the parks. And it's based on a short film that I'm sure a lot of people have never even seen. It's kind of wild. The Headless Horseman's everywhere. And to note, Magic Kingdom has like a Sleepy Hollow food stand there year round.
Yeah.
So I kind of love that.
Yeah, I do too. And he's such an interesting character because of the mystery behind him that he could really be anybody or anything, depending on the story.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Before we go, of course, when people think of Halloween, they think of treats, and Disney certainly has many, many, many dessert treats. Yes, a lot. So I'm just curious, do you have any favorites that you'd like to point out before we get going here?
I recently had the Rice Krispie Ghost, which I thought was very, very tasty. So it's a white chocolate with ghost face. The interesting thing about all of the different holiday treats is that it usually takes them a couple weeks to really get it down because you got to think they got to make this mass. And each year, what they ended up doing is they look to see like, oh, what are the guests responding to? Which ones are they interested in? And then they kind of go back. But yeah, I really kind of like the Rice Krispie, like the Mickey. There's a mini one that's dark chocolate that has like a bat on her head. So those elements really add a fun touch to them, because you just visually see them and you're like, I hope this is also tasty, which most of those have, a lot of butter in them. So they tend to be very, very tasty.
Excellent. Now, to the listeners, you're probably thinking, Jeff, you guys haven't even talked about the parties, Oogie Boogie Bash or Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. I promise you, a future episode this Halloween season, I'll be focusing more on that. So with Charlie today, we wanted to talk about, mostly stuff that's available to all of the guests who go to the parks. So Charlie, thank you so much. Before we go, I'll leave you. Is there anything, we touched on a lot, but there's a lot more.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to make sure the listeners hear about before we get going here?
So one thing you want to consider is the people who actually make all of these amazing decor and set this up. And that's the resort enhancement team. They are the experts. They study these holidays. They look at them and they look to see, how can we make this for our guests? They want to have something that their guests are going to enjoy. And that's all the parks. They put in so much time and effort and passion. They make their own displays, which they then look to tweak. They try different things out that sometimes we don't even see in the park yet. I've had a chance to tour the facilities and seen things that I'm like, I hope this makes it into the park one day. They care about how much you enjoy this experience so much. And you'll never see them. They're there, but they tend to watch and they really appreciate it. So kudos to the resort enhancement team. They really are a passionate group of people.
Excellent. Well, Charlie, thanks so much for coming on the show. Thanks so much for writing a fantastic book all about this stuff. And happy Halloween to you, sir.
Happy Halloween, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, you may want to check out episodes 787 and 789 of Disney Coast to Coast as I chat with one of the book's other authors about the Christmas content in the Disney parks. Also, if you're a Halloween fan, be sure to check out my other podcast, That Halloween Podcast, where we're discussing a new song from my Halloween playlist each day of the month. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description, and thank you for considering. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!